So what did I read in October? Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we are doing a wrap up of every single book that I read in the month of October. We will be going through chronologically, and for those of you who are interested, I did complete 7 fiction books this month. I did also complete a non-fiction book, which I didn't give a rating, but I will talk about a little bit as well. So let's jump straight in. First up, let's talk about the non-fiction book that I read this month, and this is World Building for Fantasy Fans and Authors. This is written by M.D. Presley, and I've been reading it on and off for the last couple of months. It's been pretty slow going, mainly because I've been reading it on my phone, just when I've been sat waiting to do stuff. It hasn't been part of my regular sit-down reading quota, but I have really enjoyed it. It very much feels like an amalgamation of a bunch of ideas, and it's done very well exploring why and how do we world build. It uses examples from very well-known and popular fantasy books and series, such as Lord of the Rings, A Song of Ice and Fire, as well as Avatar: The Last Airbender and Star Wars. So he uses very well-known series and properties and decides to use those as examples of how these things are used and integrated within the world building space. I did find this an interesting read. It was very slow for me and I just kind of plodded through it, found it interesting, good to pick up for 5 minutes here or there rather than reading in large chunks, and it has made me think a little bit more about the world building process and how worlds are built in series and books that I absolutely love. So definitely, if you're interested in that, go check it out. So let's jump into my fiction books for this month. The first book I completed in October was Furies of Calderon by Jim Butcher. This is the first book in the Codex Alera series, and I really did love this. I thought it was very good. I have tried to read it in the past and it didn't quite grip me, whereas this time I was much more engaged. It gripped me within the first 8 or 9 chapters, and I definitely really enjoyed it. I think it was done very well, and from what I hear, it only gets better and better from here. This being a 5-star read for me was unusual because in the last couple of months, my 5-star ratings have been a bit fewer and further between them, and actually to enjoy the first book of the month so much was a real positive for me. I really enjoyed it, and I am looking forward to jumping into book 2 of this series, hopefully in December. The next book I finished was the biggest surprise for me. This is The Seasons of Albaddon by Christopher Warman and Alain Marché. This is a self-published indie book that consists of 4 different short stories that are set in the same world, follow different characters throughout different time periods, and we see how the world is developing as their stories progress. These 4 stories aren't intertwined as such, they are very discrete. So we get one short story with one character, followed by another from another character, and so on and so forth. This was the biggest surprise for me this month. I went into this because of Steve Talks About Books and stuff, and he really loved this book, and I thought, well, why not pick it up? Why not give it a go? I was having a bit of slow going with my book I was reading at that point in time, and I absolutely blitzed through this book in about 3 days. It's only about 200 pages, but it is absolutely brilliant. It packs a real emotional punch. I haven't felt such an emotional reaction in a book of such few pages, I think possibly ever before. I absolutely adored this, and it is really wonderful. It's set in a forest, and we're dealing with people who are very intrinsically linked with the nature of the world around them, and it just tells character stories so well in so few words. It's just really, really wonderfully done, and I cannot recommend it enough. Go check out some of my other videos talking about it. I'll link them down below if you want to know more. On to the third book, which I completed this month, and this made a trio of 5-star ratings. This is The Voyage of the Basilisk by Marie Brennan, book 3 of the Memoirs of Lady Trent, and this was an absolute banger. I really, really enjoyed this book immensely. It was the first 5-star rating I gave to a book in this series, and I think it picks up from Tropic of Serpents, which I really loved. I gave 4.5 stars, and it picked that thread up and ran with it and made it so much better. I just absolutely adore this series now, and I cannot express to you how big a surprise that is to me, considering where I came from in book 1, where it was fine, but I didn't love it, to now, spoilers, I've finished book 4 this month as well, and I just absolutely adore the series so much. It's done so well, and from a month last month where I think I had 1 5-star rating, for the first 3 books I finished this month to all be 5 stars was just a joy, and it really gave me a push to keep reading more. It got me out of a little bit of a slump, and I just cannot express these 3 books how much I enjoyed them. I'm really hoping that I'm going to get to book 5 in the Memoirs of Lady Trent within the Sanctuary of Wings at some point this month. It is high on my priority list to finish, and it was on my November TBR, so it better get read, and I'm really excited for it. I'm actually a bit sad that we're going to be leaving this world, that I'm not going to have more stories in this world, which is not the kind of thing I was expecting to say when I first jumped in, but this series has done such a wonderful job of pulling me through. For those of you who don't know, we are following Lady Trent, or Isabella Camhurst, and it's her memoir, so she's looking back on her life and she's giving you the unfiltered, unadulterated series of events as they happen from her perspective, as she is trying to understand and learn much more about the different species of dragons in the world. She's a natural historian and she wants to understand how and the why of dragons, to understand more of their behaviour and their physiology, and it's just a very interesting scientific read on that front. Guys, if you're enjoying seeing my wrap up for this month, and if you're really happy that I got those 3 5-star reads in a row, which I was delighted with, do leave a like down below so people can hear more about these books and these series I've been reading, particularly as we move on into the next few. Up next was a buddy read. I was continuing on with book 3 of the Shadows of the Apt series by Adrian Tchaikovsky. As you know, this is a buddy read with Alan's channel, and I gave this a solid 4 stars. If you see my week in books from the week that I was reading this, I was a little bit conflicted, as I felt that this was the best written of these books that I've read so far. I think the writing was good. I think the character work was really good as well. Yet the plot lacked a little for me. It felt a little bit too side questy. It felt a little bit like we were on a tangent over here somewhere, waiting for the plot to really continue on in the big things that are happening in this series. So all in all, I felt that it was a very solid 4-star read, where actually the writing is better, and if the plot for book 4 is better and more engaging, if I really like what's happening in Salute the Dark, I think that actually the way Tchaikovsky is writing, you can see how he has developed from his debut novel, which was the first book in the series, and how he develops as a writer. And having read a lot of his later stuff, I can see that we're getting towards him being the writer that I know and love. So hopefully this series will continue to get better as we go. After finishing Blood of the Mantis, I jumped into my first ever D&D book, my first ever R.A. Salvatore as well, and this is Homeland, book 1 of the Dark Elf trilogy, in which we follow Drizzt Do'Urden. He is a very interesting protagonist. He's obviously got a lot of books out there about him written by R.A. Salvatore, and it's a very interesting introduction to him. I know there were books written about him previously, but this is sort of going back chronologically before those, and we're following him from a young child as he is growing up. I really did like this. I liked it a lot more than I thought I would. I think that the old school D&D vibe might not sit with me so well, but actually I think it was written very well. I think R.A. Salvatore does an incredible job with it, and it was just a really fun read. It was very enjoyable. It wasn't super deep, the themes weren't amazingly impactful, but it was just a really fun read, and I blitzed through it. I really enjoyed it. I gave it a solid 4.5 stars, and actually as of recording, I'm about halfway through book 2 in this series, so you can see I really did enjoy it. It's not going to be something that I stay up late at night thinking about. It's not something that I'm sure will be sticking with me in 2 or 3 years time, but it's been a really fun set of books to be reading. So 4.5 stars for that. Very, very enjoyable. We then went back to Tchaikovsky. I spent a day listening to the audiobook of Ironclads. This is a short novella. It's about 4 hours on audio. It's a short novella in a near future sci-fi world. Again, if you've seen me talk about this on my vlogs, I was also a little bit conflicted on this. I think the strongest thing with Ironclads was the world building. I really thought there was an interesting world going on. I liked the way that Tchaikovsky dealt with corporations and multinationals, how he dealt with military and nationalism. I thought he was done very, very well, and the world was very interesting. Unfortunately, that took a lot of page time in a book that didn't have very much page time to give. So I think we therefore lacked on character and we lacked on plot. I enjoyed it. It was good fun, but definitely not something that's going to be sticking with me in the long term. I said at the time that I actually prefer Firewalkers, which is a different Tchaikovsky novella, which deals with similar issues. I gave Ironclads 3.5 stars, and it was fine. If the synopsis of this near future multinational corporation government conglomerations sounds interesting to you, maybe give it a read, but definitely not the best Tchaikovsky, unfortunately. And then we're moving on to the two books that I finished right at the end of October. The first of those being In the Labyrinth of Drakes, which is book 4 in the Memoirs of Lady Trent. Take everything I said about Voyage of the Basilisk, book 3, and you can transfer it over here onto what I think about book 4. I love this even more than I love book 3. I love the different culture we're dropped into. I love that we get some repeating characters that we've met in previous books, and I love the way the relationships develop there. I think it's done incredibly well. I love that Isabella Camhurst is becoming so much more. I can feel her becoming the person who's writing the memoirs, if that makes sense. Like, her younger self is becoming more and more like the voice of her older self, and I really enjoy that. I think that's done very well. And I like the way that this book actually looked back on the events of previous books a lot more. This really felt like we were taking all those things that happened in those previous 3 books, and we were seeing how they impacted Isabella going forward and in this different and new scenario. And I really like the way Marie Brennan did that. I think she did it very well. And I like that it's starting to come together as a cohesive whole, and I'm really hopefully going to continue to enjoy that coming together more in book 5, but we'll see that in a few weeks' time, hopefully. And then the last book I finished this month was actually the first book I started. This was An Echo of Things to Come by James Islington, and I have a lot of things to say about this book. I've not read a climax this good since I first read The Cosmere. I love the way that James Islington brought everything to a head. I love the way that it was resolved. I love the falling action. The epilogue was mind-blowing. I really enjoyed the way he did this at the end of this book. However, the pacing of this book is a little bit all over the place, and that's partly because one of our 4 main characters we're following is having almost exclusively flashback chapters, and what that does is it really grinds the pace down to a halt, and that's a little bit painful because the plots of the other characters are really interesting, and actually even that plot of the flashback plot is interesting. I really like the knowledge we're getting. I really like the world building that we're gaining, and it is doing a great job of that, but it just slowed it down so much that I can't in good conscience give this 5 stars because it was hard to read. It was hard to continue to pick up. It felt very easy to put down and come back to later. It didn't pull me through with that sort of driving force that a really gripping book has. And yet I loved it. And yet I absolutely adored this book. I thought it was done incredibly well. It was so much fun. And like I said in my vlog again, the ending, the last 8 to 9 chapters and the epilogue just absolutely blew my mind. And I can't give it any less than 4.5 stars because it's just such a well thought through, well managed plot with relatively interesting characters and a really good world. And it's a 4.5 star read. And I would love to give it 5. I just can't with how easy it was for me to put it down and take a long time to get through. So I am really looking forward to The Light of All That Falls, which I think you can just about see behind me. I'm really looking forward to getting to that. It probably won't be till December, but I will be really excited to get to that because it has left me wanting more. The ending to this book was really satisfying, but definitely left me wanting more as well. So there you go. You can see a very good reading month. Out of the 8 fiction books I read, I gave 4 of them 5 stars, which is brilliant. That's almost as many books as I gave 5 stars in the whole of the last quarter. So yeah, a really strong start to the 4th quarter of this year for me. I had 4 5-star reads, 2 4.5 star reads, 1 4-star read and 1 3.5 star read. So a really good reading month all in all, especially considering the 3.5 star was such a short book to get to. That's all right. I can get through books that length even if they're not my absolute favourites. So a really solid reading month for me, and I hope that you guys have had as good a reading month as I have, and I will see you again later in the month so you can see how I've done in November and how my reading has been continuing on, especially finishing off some of the series that I have been reading in October as well.